Hi, we're Disability Rights Mississippi,
a private nonprofit agency that advocates for the rights of people with disabilities.
Today, we want to talk to you about something that's important to all of us.
Voting and civic engagement.
You might have heard, there's a big election coming up this November. Today, we're going to talk about how you can take part. By voting, we'll talk about what you need to do to prepare to vote in the election and how to vote. But first, let's talk about why you should vote.
Did you know that more people in the U.S. check their Facebook or watch the Super Bowl than exercise their right to vote? And in addition to that, studies show that the United States has one of the lowest rates of youth voter turnout in the world. What?
But you might be asking, why should this matter to me? In each and every election, you have the chance to make a difference, make a change, and say what matters to you. Jobs, education, war, healthcare, the environment. We're talking about some pretty important things here. These are issues that directly impact the communities we choose to live in. So, how come people aren't voting? Is it because we don't care? Or maybe it's because we don't have all the information.
So, let's start with a little history.
Our first election came after America's independence from Great Britain. We could now make our own laws and elect our own leaders instead of being ruled by a king. But voting back then was different. You had to own property and be a white man to vote. That leaves out a lot of us, right?
Fast forward 80 years to the end of the Civil War. Slavery was abolished and all men were given the right to vote. Well, not quite. Just because Black Americans were given the right to vote, it didn't mean they could use it. Barriers were put in place, like tests and taxes, that prevented many from being able to actually vote. It took nearly 100 years to achieve true equality at the polls. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was finally passed, outlawing many of the tricks that had been used to keep people from voting.
Meanwhile, women were also being left out of the equation. State by state, women fought for their right to vote before finally taking the fight to Washington, where, in 1920, they were granted their right to vote across the nation. Young people also had to fight for their right to vote, because even after the Voting Rights Act was passed, you had to be 21 to vote. But at 18, you could be sent to war. Not fair, right? Young people rose up in protest, and in 1971, the law changed to allow anyone 18 or older the right to vote.
Each time the laws changed, it gradually made it easier for people with disabilities to vote. Thanks to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act 30 years ago and the Help America Vote Act in 2002, we all truly have the right to vote privately, independently, and without barriers.
So, what does all of this mean for you now?
It means your choices matter. Your vote is your way to stand up for what you believe in. Our government is supposed to be the voice of the people, so it's important that your voice is heard.
People have fought to make sure you have the right to vote. You owe it to yourself and to those who have come before you to exercise that right. Your vote is your voice.
Studies have also shown that one of the biggest factors to low participation in young voters is lack of confidence or understanding about the process, which can certainly seem complicated. So let's talk about the details. You can vote if you are going to turn 18 by election day, you are a citizen of the United States, you are a resident of Mississippi, and you are registered to vote.
How do you register to vote? You can register to vote in Mississippi in person at your local election office or by printing a voter registration form. Be sure to print both sides so that you can find the address to mail it in to your county. The form looks like this. It asks for information like your name, address, and age. It also asks you to promise that the information you give is truthful. In Mississippi, photo identification is required. If you don't have a driver's license, you can get what's called a voter ID card through the Secretary of State's office. If you're a person with a disability and you have a guardian, you can still vote, unless your guardianship order specifically says otherwise.
There are always deadlines for registration for any election. And if you want to vote in the presidential election this November, you must register to vote by October 5th, 2020.
So you've registered. What's next? It's time to make a plan to vote.
How will you vote? This year, we have a lot to think about when it comes to voting because of COVID-19. Luckily, you have options and can decide what is best for you. Talk to your family and friends and think about how you want to vote this year.
You can vote in person at your local polling place, which is the place where you cast your ballot. You can check your polling place by calling your local circuit clerk. Because of the coronavirus, some polling locations may be closed or moved, so it is important to double check where you will vote. On Election Day, your polling place will be open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. You can also vote absentee, which is when you vote through the mail or you vote early in person before Election Day. You do have to provide a valid reason for voting absentee, like you're going to be out of town or under your doctor's direction, you feel voting in person would not be safe for you. You can check with your local circuit clerk's office to see if you qualify to vote absentee. For step-by-step instructions on how to vote absentee, be sure to check out your absentee voter guide for 2020 provided by Disability Rights. You will have to have a witness to your ballot, but this year it can be anyone over the age of 18. If this is your first time voting after you've registered by mailing in your registration, then you will need to take your absentee ballot back to the circuit clerk's office in person before the election so you can show your ID.
So, you decided how you're going to vote. Now, let's prepare to vote.
It's important that you take some time to learn about who and what you're voting for. This year you'll vote on important matters like who will be president. Kind of a big deal. You'll also have the chance to vote for a new state flag for Mississippi. You can see a sample ballot by going to the Secretary of State's website.
It's also important you know your rights. No matter how you're voting, you have the right to vote privately and independently. Remember, no one can tell you who or what to vote for. It's your vote, no one else's.
If you go to the polls, you have the right to be able to access your polling place, the voting machine, and to have someone help you cast your vote if you need it. If you vote by mail and need someone to help you complete the forms, that's okay too. If you do choose to vote in person at your local polling site on Election Day and you experience any kind of difficulty, just remember to never leave your polling site without casting a ballot. You can request to cast an affidavit ballot, which is also called a provisional ballot. This is your right, and you'll be able to follow up with the circuit clerk's office later on to make sure your vote was counted.
Now what? You have a better understanding of the process. So now it's time to complete your plan. Before you head to the polls to cast your vote, make a checklist to be sure you're ready. Once you've got your plan in place, there's only one thing left to remember. Vote.
No matter why you vote, how you vote, or who you vote for, the most important thing is that you vote. If you experience any kind of difficulty or barrier when trying to cast your ballot, whether in person or by absentee, call us at 1-800-772-4057. This number will be open all day on Election Day. Your voice matters and every vote counts.
Remember to vote on November 3rd, 2020.
Remember to vote on November 3rd, 2020.